My brother stole $30,000, and my wife left me for him. You know, there's a saying that God laughs when he hears our plans. Seems like the last few years, he's been having a full-blown hysteric fit watching my life unfold. Not the gentle chuckle kind either. More like the doubled over, tears streaming, can't catch your breath kind of laughter. The kind that makes other angels uncomfortable at the heavenly water cooler. My name's Tom Miller, 42 years old, registered nurse at Chicago General's Emergency Department. I've held bleeding arteries closed with my bare hands, watched miracles happen, and seen dreams die on gurneys at 3 a.m. But this story isn't about any of that. It's about how my own perfectly reasonable dream got sucker punched by reality, then kicked while it was down for good measure. See, Sarah and I had it all figured out. We'd been married 8 years, together for 12. She worked in marketing for some tech startup that made apps I still don't understand. Something about syncing your coffee maker with your meditation schedule. I save lives for $25 an hour, which sounds noble until you realize a hospital parking garage charges $18 a day. We had this dream, though, kids, not the biological kind. We'd already been down that road, spent enough on fertility treatments to buy a decent boat. No, we were going the adoption route. Had the whole thing mapped out like a military operation. Sarah even made spreadsheets, color-coded ones. The future nursery was already half done. We painted one wall this shade called duck egg that looked suspiciously like hospital green to me, but Sarah insisted it was calming. Spent 3 weekends arguing whether the wall decal should be dinosaurs or unicorns. Ended up ordering both because that's what marriage is. Compromise that makes nobody completely happy, but keeps everyone from sleeping on the couch. Every morning, I'd drop my spare change and any cash tips from grateful patients into this old Folgers can. Sarah had wrapped in construction paper and written Adoption Fund, Project Baby in glitter pen. Very professional. It sat on our kitchen counter like a ceramic deity we made offerings to. Some weeks it was $20, sometimes just coins, but it was growing, slowly, like trying to fill a swimming pool with a turkey baster. The adoption agency wanted $30,000 minimum. We had $8,400 and change. At our current rate, we'd be ready to adopt right around the time we qualified for Social Security. Then came the appointment that changed everything. Funny how life's biggest moments happen in the most mundane places. A beige office with motivational posters about perseverance. Some fern dying slowly in the corner despite its proximity to a poster claiming growth happens outside your comfort zone. The urologist had the kind of mustache that belonged in a barbershop quartet. He cleared his throat exactly 3 times before delivering news. I counted because that's what you do when your brain doesn't want to process what your ears are hearing. Low motility, abnormal morphology, reduced count. He rattled off numbers and percentages like a weather forecast for the world's most depressing storm system. I sat there thinking how ironic it was that I knew exactly what all those terms meant. Every medical professional's curse. Understanding precisely how screwed you are. I work in emergency medicine. I see bodies break in spectacular ways every single day. Motorcycle versus semi-truck. Chainsaw versus poor judgment. Gravity versus overconfidence. But somehow I never thought my own body would betray me in such a quiet, anticlimactic way. No dramatic accident. No exotic disease. Just inadequacy at the cellular level. Sarah held my hand in the parking lot afterward, said all the right things. We'll figure it out. Adoption is still an option. This doesn't change anything. But her eyes were already doing that thing where they look at you but see through you, like you're becoming transparent. A ghost of the man she thought she married. The drive home took 23 minutes. I know because I watched every single one tick by on the dashboard clock. Sarah filled the silence with NPR, something about housing markets, or maybe prairie restoration. Hard to tell when your world's imploding in slow motion. 2 weeks later came the family dinner that should have been in a psychology textbook under Exercises in Inadequacy. My parents' house in Naperville. Same dining room where I'd eaten tater tot casserole every Tuesday for 18 years. Same chandelier Mom bought at an estate sale, and Dad never quite hung straight. Mark showed up in a suit that probably cost more than I make in a month. My older brother, the real estate developer, the success story, the one who got the height genes and the jaw that could sell ice to Eskimos. He just landed some massive project downtown. Kept calling it a game changer, like he was announcing a new iPhone. Mom had made her famous pot roast, which was famous mostly for being consistently mediocre. But Mark acted like it was Michelin star cuisine. That's his gift. Making everyone feel special while somehow making about him. He launched into his presentation about the Elysium Tower, right there between the mashed potatoes and green beans. Pulled out his phone, showed us renderings. 90 stories of glass and steel reaching toward heaven, like Chicago's middle finger to gravity. Sustainable design, mixed-use space, smart building technology that would practically wipe your nose for you. Sarah leaned forward, genuinely fascinated, asked about square footage, environmental impact, the investor pipeline, questions I didn't even know she knew how to ask. Mark ate it up, going full TED Talk mode. He started throwing around phrases like synergy of market flows and vertical integration of lifestyle solutions, like he was conducting a symphony only he could hear. I could tell you exactly how to insert a central line or identify the signs of internal bleeding, but apparently that's not dinner table conversation. That's just Tuesday for me. Then came the joke. Mark's special brand of humor that feels like a hug until you realize it's a chokehold. Tom here saves lives for $25 an hour, he said, raising his wine glass in my direction. Meanwhile, I just build the places where those lives get to live afterward. Everyone contributes what they can, right? Some of us build empires. Some of us clean up the mess when someone falls off the empire. The table laughed. Even Sarah smiled. That polite smile, that meant she didn't want to make waves. I laughed too, because that's what you do. You laugh when your brother makes you the punchline. You laugh when your wife finds a success stories more engaging than your actual life-saving stories. You laugh because the alternative is flipping the table like Jesus with the money changers. Sarah spent the rest of dinner hanging on Mark's every word. Something shifted in her posture when he talked. Shoulders back, eyes bright. The way she used to look at me when I'd tell her about saving someone's life during a cold blue. Back when my stories were enough. Back when $25 an hour felt like honest work instead of a participation trophy. Dad asked me about work exactly once. I started telling him about this kid who came in after a skateboarding accident, how we'd managed to save his leg when everyone thought amputation was inevitable. But Mark's phone rang halfway through, some investor from Tokyo, and suddenly everyone was listening to him negotiate in broken Japanese he'd learned from an app. I watched him gesture confidently, mangling pronunciation but somehow making the deal anyway. And I thought, this guy just decided to learn Japanese through an app, and he did it. Just like that, between meetings and martinis. Meanwhile, I couldn't make my own body do the one biological thing it was designed for. He builds towers that pierce the clouds, and I can't even build a family. The irony tasted worse than Mom's under cinnamon pie. Mom served her apple pie, the one where she never adds enough cinnamon, but everyone pretends it's perfect. I watched Sarah watch Mark, studied the way her eyes tracked his gestures, how she nodded at his explanations about market volatility and construction timelines. She was listening with her whole body. When I talked, she just used her ears. And lately, only one of them. I thought about our Folgers sitting on the counter at home. $8,400.67 as of that morning. Mark probably spent that much on his suit and shoes. The math was simple and cruel. At my current earning rate, assuming no emergencies, no car repairs, no life happening, we'd need another 3 years minimum. Sarah would be 38. The adoption agency would start asking different questions, making different faces. The thing about being a nurse is you get really good at reading vital signs. Not just the medical ones, the human ones. The way someone's breathing changes when they're about to give bad news. How eyes dilate when someone's falling out of love. The tiny facial muscles that contract when someone's disappointed but trying to hide it. Sarah was exhibiting all the symptoms of someone whose condition was deteriorating. Not acute, chronic, the kind of decline that happens so slowly you don't notice until one day they're coding and you're scrambling for the crash cart, but it's already too late. They say money doesn't corrupt people, just reveals who they really are, like those UV lights that show you what's really on your hotel bed sheets. That night, watching my wife's face light up at my brother's success while dimming at my presence, I realized dreams work the same way. Our shared dream of having a child hadn't brought us together. It had just illuminated how far apart we'd already drifted. Mark was building towers that scraped the sky. I was scraping by. Sarah wanted to ascend. I was just trying not to fall. The math was getting simpler by the minute. After dinner, Mark walked us out to our car. Our sensible Honda Civic parked next to his Tesla, like a visual metaphor I didn't ask for. He clapped me on the shoulder with his development deal closing hand. "You guys still doing the adoption thing?" He asked it the way you'd ask if someone's still collecting stamps or learning the ukulele, like a hobby that's admirable but ultimately quaint. Sarah answered before I could, told him about the timeline, the costs, the challenges. Her voice had that pitch it gets when she's trying to sound optimistic about something that's exhausting her. Mark nodded, made sympathetic noises, offered nothing concrete, just said we should hang in there and it'll all work out. Easy to say when you're standing next to a car that costs more than my annual salary. The drive home was 28 minutes. Longer route because of construction. Sarah filled the car with Mark's words, repeated his insights about market growth, his vision for the city's skyline, his philosophy about creating spaces that elevate human potential. I kept thinking about that phrase. Elevate human potential. What about those of us already at ground level, just trying to keep people breathing? What about the potential in saving lives rather than building monuments to commerce? But I didn't say any of that. Just nodded and made agreement sounds while watching the streetlights pass like a countdown to something I couldn't quite name yet. We pulled into our driveway, our little two-bedroom ranch house in Oak Park, the one with the dodgy gutters and the fence that leans when the wind picks up. Sarah was still talking about the Elysium Tower, how Mark was really making something of himself, how he was building a legacy. I turned off the engine but didn't get out, just sat there looking at her. Really looking. The porch light caught her face in this way that made her look like a stranger. Beautiful, familiar, but somehow foreign, like when you see your reflection in a store window and don't recognize yourself for a second. She was still talking about Mark's vision for sustainable urban development when I felt it. That cold, creeping fear that starts in your spine and spreads like contrast dye in a CT scan. The kind of fear that comes with clarity. I was losing her, not to another man, not yet, but to an idea of what a man should be, what success should look like, what a future should hold. And my future, our future, looked less like the Elysium Tower and more like that Folgers can on the counter. Spare change and good intentions, never quite enough to reach what we wanted. Sarah's voice faded to background noise. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady but somehow wrong. Like a patient who looks fine on paper, but, you just know something's about to go sideways. I sat in that car, engine cooling, wife glowing with secondhand ambition for my brother's dreams, and felt the first crack in my own foundation. The kind you can't patch with good intentions or positive thinking. The kind that spreads slowly at first, then all at once. The dashboard clock read 10:47 p.m. Sarah was still talking. I was still nodding. But somewhere between the driveway and the front door, something fundamental had shifted, like tectonic plates moving just enough to change the landscape forever. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment, the exact moment when our carefully planned future started its slow-motion collapse. All it would take was one more push, one more crack in the foundation. And knowing my brother Mark, that push was probably already in motion. 3 weeks after that dinner. 3 weeks of Sarah's silence being louder than any argument we'd ever had. 3 weeks of that Folgers can on the counter looking less like a dream fund and more like a memorial to something that died, but nobody had the guts to bury yet. Then Mark showed up at our door on a Tuesday evening. Not the Tesla this time. He drove his Range Rover, the one he called his casual car. Like some people have casual Fridays, Mark had casual luxury vehicles. He came bearing gifts. A bottle of wine that cost more than our weekly grocery budget, and a leather portfolio that smelled like money and promises. Sarah lit up when she saw him. First genuine smile I'd seen from her since the diagnosis. The kind that reached her eyes and made her look 25 again. Mark didn't come as a salesman. No, he was too smart for that. He came as a savior wrapped in Armani, bearing the gospel of financial salvation. We sat in our living room, him on our sagging couch that we'd been meaning to replace for 3 years, looking as out of place as a swan in a chicken coop. He opened that leather portfolio with the ceremony of a priest preparing communion. Inside were glossy brochures, architectural renderings, financial projections printed on paper thick enough to build a house with. The company name gleamed in embossed gold letters. Innovate Dynamics. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The concerned brother pose. The one he'd perfected back when he used to borrow my lunch money and somehow make me feel grateful for the opportunity to help him. He painted a picture with his words. Not of investment returns or market predictions. No, Mark was smarter than that. He painted a future. A sustainable future where his Elysium Tower would be the first carbon-negative skyscraper in Chicago. Where Innovate Dynamics would revolutionize green technology. Where early investors wouldn't just make money, they'd save the planet. The numbers he showed us weren't aggressive. That was the genius of it. Reasonable returns. Sustainable growth. Nothing that screamed too good to be true. Just good enough to be possible. He'd learned that much from all those years in real estate. The best lies are mostly truth. He talked about the patented air filtration system that would actually clean the city's air as it circulated through the building. About the revolutionary solar panel efficiency that would feed power back into the grid. About how this wasn't just an investment opportunity. It was a chance to be part of something bigger. Something that mattered. Sarah was mesmerized. She asked questions about carbon offsets and sustainability metrics. Terms I'd never heard her use before, but suddenly seemed to flow from her mouth like she'd been speaking this language her whole life. Mark answered each one with the patience of a teacher and precision of a surgeon. My kind of surgeon. The kind that cuts deep, but makes you things for your own good. Then came the masterstroke. He turned to me, put his hand on my shoulder. That same hand that had pushed me off my bike when we were kids, then helped me up and convinced me I'd fallen on my own. He said investing wasn't just about money. It was about believing in something, about taking that leap of faith that separated the dreamers from the doers. He said he saw how hard I worked, how much I cared about making a difference. This was my chance to make a difference on a larger scale. Not just saving lives one at a time, but improving life for thousands through sustainable development. He said he was offering this to us first, before his big investors, because we were family, because he believed in us, because he wanted us to have our shot at something bigger than living paycheck to paycheck. The minimum investment was usually $100,000, but for us, $25,000. He could swing that, pull some strings, call in some favors. But the window was closing. The big presentation to major investors was in 2 weeks. $25,000. Just about everything we had saved, plus our emergency fund, plus the equity line of credit on the house we'd been approved for, but never used. It was possible. Barely, but possible. After Mark left, Sarah transformed into someone I'd never seen before. She spread his materials across our dining table like battle plans. Made lists, ran calculations on her phone. The same woman who'd been giving me the silent treatment for 3 weeks suddenly couldn't stop talking. She talked about opportunity, about growth, about being part of something revolutionary. Her eyes had that fever-bright quality of someone who'd found religion, or maybe just found a way out of a life that had become too small for her ambitions. I tried to be the voice of reason, asked about due diligence, about risk assessment, about what would happen if things went wrong. But every concern I raised, Sarah had an answer. Mark wouldn't steer us wrong. He was family. He was successful. He knew what he was doing. And weren't we tired of being careful? Of being safe? of being small? Then came the conversation that broke me. We were lying in bed, her back to me as usual, when she rolled over. First time she'd faced me in bed in weeks. The streetlight through our blinds striped her face like prison bars. She said this was our chance. Our only chance, maybe. That Mark believed in us when nobody else did. That he was offering us a ladder out of the hole we dug ourselves into. She said she was tired of watching our dreams die a slow death in a coffee can. Tired of doing everything right and having nothing to show for it. Then she said the words that cut deeper than any scalpel I'd ever held. She looked me straight in the eye, no blinking, no hesitation, and said she wanted a child, not another patient to take care of. That one sentence. 11 words that summed up everything she thought I'd become. Weak, broken, needy. She said if I couldn't take this leap, if I couldn't believe in us enough to try, then what was the point? What were we even doing together? Saving quarters while life passed us by? Watching everyone else build their futures while we counted pennies and made excuses? The silence after that was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Louder than any code blue alarm. Louder than any ambulance siren. It was the sound of an ultimatum wrapped in desperation, wrapped in love that had turned toxic. So I said yes. Not because I believed in innovate dynamics or carbon-negative buildings or revolutionary solar panels. I said yes because I needed to prove I wasn't what that diagnosis had made me. I wasn't just a patient, a statistic, a failure at the most basic biological level. I was still a man who could take risks, who could provide, who could be more than just adequate. We liquidated everything, emptied the savings, maxed out the equity line, even cashed in my pathetic 401k, taking the penalty, because what was retirement compared to right now? Sarah handled the paperwork with an efficiency that should have scared me. She had us liquid in 72 hours. The wire transfer went through on a Thursday. $25,000. Our entire future distilled into a series of numbers moving from our account to Innovate Dynamics LLC. Sarah actually cried when she hit confirm. Happy tears, she said. The first happy tears in months. Mark called that evening to welcome us to the Innovate Dynamics family. Use words like revolutionary and transformative and paradigm shift with the confidence of someone who'd never met a buzzword he didn't like. Sarah put him on speaker. I listened to my brother sell us our own dreams back to us at a premium markup. For 6 months, we lived on hope and quarterly reports. Glossy documents that showed progress, growth, positive momentum. Construction was on schedule. Investors were excited. The technology was exceeding expectations. Sarah framed the first report, actually framed it and hung it in our bedroom, like it was our diploma from the University of Finally Made It. She started dressing differently, bought clothes she couldn't afford because we were going to be able to afford them soon. Started talking about moving to a better neighborhood, maybe Lincoln Park, maybe even Gold Coast. Started using when instead of if when talking about our future children. I worked extra shifts, picked up overtime nobody wanted, holidays, nights, the shift that made your bones ache and your soul dim. But it was temporary, just until the investment matured, just until we could breathe again. The Folgers can disappear from the counter. Sarah replaced it with succulent in a geometric planner. Said we didn't need it anymore. We'd graduated from coins to real money. Then came the call. A Thursday evening in September. I was making dinner, spaghetti with sauce from a jar, because I was too tired to care. Sarah was at her laptop, probably looking at houses we couldn't afford yet, but would soon. My phone rang. Mark's name on the screen. His voice was different, irritated, inconvenienced, like I'd interrupted something important by answering my own phone. He talked fast, used phrases like technical difficulties and investor pullout and temporary liquidity issue. The words came at me like bullets, but they all meant the same thing. The money was gone, frozen, inaccessible. Pick your euphemism for you're screwed. I asked when we might see our investment back. He actually laughed. A short, sharp bark that sounded like punctuation. He said this was business. There were risks. I knew that going in. Everyone knew that. These things happen. Winners bounce back. Losers whine about it. No apology. No acknowledgement that he'd specifically pitched this as low risk. No recognition that this was our everything, not just disposable income. To him, we were just a line item on a spreadsheet, a minor casualty in his bigger game. The call lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know because I stared at the duration after he hung up, like those numbers might somehow change if I looked at them hard enough. Sarah was standing in the doorway when I looked up. She'd heard enough from my side of the conversation. Her face was the kind of calm that comes right before everything explodes. The eye of the hurricane where everything seems still, but you know destruction is seconds away. She didn't yell, didn't cry, just asked one question. Was it all gone? I nodded. She nodded back. Then she walked to our bedroom. I heard drawers opening, hangers scraping, the zipper of the suitcase we'd bought for the honeymoon. We never quite took. When she came back out, she was transformed, not into someone new, but into someone who'd been waiting underneath all along, someone who'd already made this decision a dozen times in her head and was just waiting for the right moment to execute it. She said Mark had called her first. 10 minutes before he called me, gave her the same speech but added something extra, told her not to worry, that he'd bounce back, that this was just a setback in a longer game, that winners knew how to take a hit and keep moving, that he hoped I wouldn't take it too hard, given everything else I was dealing with. Like my infertility was just another item on a list of my failures. Like I was something to be managed and handled carefully. Sarah's voice was flat when she repeated his words. She'd made her decision before she even heard my side of the conversation. She said it wasn't about the money. It was about what the money represented. Mark had taken a shot and missed, but he'd taken it. He'd risked everything on a vision, even if that vision was built on lies and fancy brochures. He was a fighter who'd lost a round but would be back in the ring tomorrow. And me? I'd let our dream die in a coffee can. I'd counted pennies while life happened around us. And when I finally did take a risk, I'd done it not out of vision or courage but out of fear. Fear of losing her. Fear of being seen as less than a man. Fear of proving that diagnosis right. She said she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't be married to someone who needed to be convinced to fight for their own life. Couldn't wake up every day next to someone who approached life like a chronic condition to be managed rather than an adventure to be lived. The suitcase wheels squeaked on our hardwood floor as she pulled it to the door. She turned back once. Said she'd have her lawyer call about the paperwork. Said she was sorry it ended this way. Said she hoped I'd find someone who could love me for who I was, not who she'd hoped I'd become. Then she was gone. The door closed with a soft click of finality. No slam, no drama, just the gentle sound of a life being amputated with surgical precision. I stood in our living room for 17 minutes. I know, because the microwave clock was the only thing moving in the entire house. The spaghetti water had boiled over, leaving a mess on the stovetop that looked like my life, something that had bubbled over and left a stain that would never quite come clean. I walked to the dining table where Sarah had spread out Mark's materials 6 months ago. They were still there, under bills and junk mail, like archaeological evidence of our stupidity. Innovative dynamics, changing the world one investment at a time. The golden lettering had worn off from Sarah handling them so much, leaving ghost letters that you could only see if you held them at the right angle. The silence in the house was absolute. The kind of silence you get in the ER after calling time of death, when all the machines stop beeping and everyone stops moving and there's just a fact of ending. On the kitchen counter, where our Folgers can use to sit, Sarah's geometric planter held a dead succulent. Turns out even plants designed to survive neglect have their limits. Brown and shriveled, it sat there like a monument to good intentions and bad execution. I picked up the empty Folgers can from the recycling bin, held it up to the light. Adoption Fund Project Baby, in Sarah's glitter pen handwriting, faded but still visible. Like everything else in my life, still there in theory, but functionally deceased. I set it on the counter, where it used to live. Empty now, no change rattling around to give the illusion of progress. Just hollow metal and faded dreams. The perfect centerpiece for a life that had been systematically stripped of everything that mattered. The house settled around me with small sounds, the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, the sound of a life continuing its mechanical functions even after the soul had left. I sat at my dining room table, in the same chair where I'd signed our future away 6 months ago, and stared at that empty can. Somewhere across town, Mark was probably having dinner at some expensive restaurant, already working his next angle. Sarah was probably at her sister's, planning her next move. And I was sitting in the ruins of a life that had been built on spare change and good intentions, finally understanding that sometimes the most expensive mistakes are the ones that cost you everything. The Folgers had sat there, patient and empty, waiting to be filled with something that would never come. Just like me, the next 6 months passed like a kidney stone. Slow, painful, and leaving damage you couldn't see but definitely felt. I became a ghost, haunting my own life. Wake up at 5:30. Shower with water hot enough to feel something. Drive to work on muscle memory. Save lives on autopilot. Drive home. Microwave something that claimed to be food. Stare at the wall. Sleep. Repeat. I become my own patient, treating the symptoms but ignoring the disease. The disease was indifference. Complete, terminal indifference to everything except the mechanical act of continuing to exist. The empty Folgers can still sat on the counter. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Couldn't bring myself to do anything with it either. It just sat there, a monument of failed dreams and spare change, gathering dust like everything else in my life. Work became my hiding place. The ER never stops, never asks how you're doing, never judges. It just demands your attention, your skills, your presence. It's the perfect relationship for someone who's given up on actual relationships. The patients came and went. Heart attacks, overdoses, car accidents, bar fights. I saved some, lost others, felt nothing either way. Then Arthur Johnson rolled into my life on a gurney, complaining the whole way. 80 years old, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and a personality like barbed wire dipped in lemon juice. First thing he said when I started his floor was that whoever designed the hospital gowns clearly had issues with human dignity and probably needed therapy. He became a regular, in and out every few weeks when his lungs decided to throw a tantrum. Most nurses drew straws to avoid his room, not because he was mean, but because he was exhausting. The man could find fault with oxygen, literally, complained that the nasal cannula was poorly designed, and he could engineer something better with a drinking straw and some tape. I liked him immediately. There's something refreshing about someone who's given up on being polite. He reminded me that you could be bitter without being broken. Plus, he was the only person who didn't look at me with pity. Everyone else at the hospital knew about Sarah leaving, about Mark, about the money. They looked at me like I was a wounded animal. They were afraid might bite if they got too close. Arthur just looked at me like I was another idiot in a world full of them. It was the most honest relationship I'd had in months. During one of his longer stays, when they had him on a BiPAP machine that he called Satan's vacuum cleaner, we got a talking. Well, he talked. I listened. Complained about everything from the hospital's ventilation system to the way they designed the parking garage. But sometimes, between complaints, real stories leaked out. He'd been an engineer, specialized in HVAC systems, which explained his obsession with the hospital's air circulation. Worked for 40 years designing systems for commercial buildings. Had dozens of patents, most of them gathering dust in some filing cabinet because the industry moved on to newer, shinier things. One evening, when his O2 stats were particularly cranky, he mentioned something that stuck in my brain like a splinter. He was talking about how the new construction in Chicago was all flash and no substance. All these glass towers that leaked energy like a sieve. Then his voice got this bitter edge, sharper than usual. He told me about showing his revolutionary energy-saving system to some hotshot developer a few years back. Some young guy with teeth so white they could blind you, and a handshake like he was trying to prove something. The developer had looked at his blueprints for maybe 30 seconds, then smiled that corporate smile that means nothing good is coming. Arthur's voice got quiet when he described how the guy had patted him on the shoulder and suggested he enjoy his retirement, maybe take up golf. Leave the future to the younger generation. Then he'd been escorted out by security like he was trying to sell them magic beans instead of legitimate engineering innovations. He never said the developer's name. Didn't need to. The description was enough to plant a seed in my mind. Teeth like spotlights. Condescending smile. Dismissing brilliance because it came in an old package. It sounded familiar. Too familiar. But I didn't push. What would be the point? We were just two bitter men in a hospital room, united by our separate failures. He'd been dismissed by the future. I'd been discarded by it. Same result, different paths. Arthur's stays became longer. His complaints became weaker. COPD is like that. It doesn't kill you all at once. It just slowly steals your breath until one day there's none left to steal. I watched him fade over months, his fire dimming but never quite going out. Even on oxygen, struggling for every breath, he found energy to complain about the thread count of the hospital sheets. The last time I saw him alive was a Tuesday, October, with that Chicago wind that cuts through you like a premonition. His numbers were bad. We both knew it. That unspoken understanding that passes between medical professionals and patients who've been around long enough to read the signs. He was on high-flow oxygen, but his color was wrong. That gray-blue tinge, that means the body's given up on peripheral circulation to focus on keeping the vital organs running. Last stand physiology. I'd seen it 1,000 times. This time it actually hurt to watch. He waved me over with fingers that looked like twigs, grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. The effort made his O2 alarm beep, but he ignored it. His eyes had that clarity that sometimes comes right before the end. Like the clouds part and people see something we can't. He told me about a trunk, an old steamer trunk in his apartment. Said his nephew would probably toss it, thinking it was junk. Begged me not to let that happen. Inside, under all his old blueprints and patents, was a yellow envelope. Said there were instructions in it. Important instructions. His grip tightened. Made me promise. Not ask, not request. Made me promise to find that envelope and follow whatever was inside. Said it was his only shot at matching, at proving those dismissive young suits wrong. I promise. What else do you do when a dying man asks for one last favor? You promise, and you mean it, even if it seems crazy. Arthur Johnson died at 3:47 a.m. I wasn't there. I was home, staring at my ceiling when my phone buzzed with the notification. Another name moved from the active patient list to the past tense. Another bed freed up for the next broken body. The circle of hospital life. I went to his funeral. There were 8 people there, including the funeral director. His nephew gave a eulogy that was obviously Googled, talking about celebrating a life well lived and finding peace in memories. Generic words for a man who was anything but generic. I wanted to stand up and tell them about the real Arthur, the one who could find 17 things wrong with a paper cup, the genius who'd been dismissed and discarded like expired medicine. But I didn't. I sat there in a rental suit that smelled like other people's grief and kept my promise locked in my chest. It took me 3 months to get up the nerve to actually look for the trunk. 3 months of that promise rattling around in my head like a marble in a coffee can. Finally, on a Sunday when the walls of my house felt like they were closing in, I drove to Arthur's apartment building in Rogers Park. His nephew had given me a key at the funeral. Said take anything I wanted before the estate sale. The apartment was exactly what you'd expect from an 80-year-old engineer. Organized chaos. Stacks of Scientific American from the 70s. Tools arranged with military precision. And in the bedroom closet, behind suits that still had dry cleaning tags from 2015, was the trunk. It weighed a ton. Inside were blueprints, rolled and flattened, some dating back to the 60s. Patents for things I didn't understand. Calculations in handwriting, so precise it looked like font. And at the very bottom, wrapped in plastic like evidence, was a yellow envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, legal size, typed on an actual typewriter, complete with slightly misaligned letters. It was a will of sorts, not for money or property, but for intellectual property. It transferred all rights to the contents of the trunk to whoever was reading this letter. At the bottom, Arthur's signature and a notary seal from 2 years ago. I sat on his dusty floor, surrounded by the paper remnants of a brilliant career, holding this document that made no sense. Why me? Why would he leave his life's work to a nurse who couldn't tell a blueprint from a dinner menu? The smart thing would have been to throw it all away, or donate it to some engineering school. Let someone who knew what they were looking at figure out if any of it mattered. But I'd made a promise, and promises to dead men are the kind you keep even when they make no sense. I found a patent attorney through Google, Marcus Wheeler, with an office in a building that had seen better decades. The kind of lawyer who advertises on bus stops and promises free consultations. He wanted $1,500 just to look through the trunk's contents. $1,500 I didn't have, but somehow scraped together by selling everything Sarah hadn't taken. The good TV. The gaming console I never used. The watch my father gave me for graduation. Wheeler said he'd need 3 weeks. 3 weeks to determine if Arthur's trunk of papers was genius or garbage. I went back to my routine. Work, home, stare at walls, sleep, repeat. The empty Folgers can watch me from the counter like a ceramic judge. Then came the call. A Thursday afternoon. I was eating a gas station sandwich in the hospital break room when Wheeler's number lit up my phone. His voice was different. Not the bored tone of our first meeting. This was the voice of someone who'd found gold in what they thought was dirt. He said I needed to come to his office immediately. Said I should sit down before he explained what he'd found. Said a phrase that would change everything but meant nothing to me at the time. Mr. Miller, that pile of old papers you brought me contains something extraordinary. I drove to his office with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for cardiac patients. Wheeler was waiting with coffee that tasted like burnt hope and a stack of documents that would flip my entire world inside out. He spread them across his desk like a dealer showing his hand. Arthur hadn't just been brilliant. He'd been revolutionary. His HVAC system design wasn't just energy efficient. It was game-changing. Carbon-negative air circulation. Energy recovery that exceeded current technology by 40%. Patents that had been filed but never developed because nobody took an old man seriously. But here's where it got interesting. Wheeler had done his research. The system Arthur designed, it was currently being used. Right now, in a building under construction. The blueprints had been modified slightly, cosmetically really, but the core innovation was identical. Someone had stolen Arthur's work. The building was the Elysium Tower. The developer was Innovate Dynamics. The names hit me like defibrillator paddles. Everything clicked. Arthur's story about the developer with the blazing teeth. The timing. The dismissal. Mark hadn't just stolen from me. He'd stolen from Arthur first. He'd taken an old man's genius and claimed it as his own, then had the audacity to use it in his monument to himself. Wheeler was still talking, something about patent infringement and prior art and legal precedents. But I'd stopped listening. I was thinking about Arthur dying in that hospital bed, thinking his work meant nothing, about Mark sitting in his Range Rover, building his empire on stolen foundations, about justice and promises, and the strange ways the universe sometimes balances its books. Wheeler's voice cut through my thoughts with a question that changed everything. He asked if I wanted to pursue legal action. The patent documentation was clear. The infringement was obvious. The damages, considering the scale of the project and the value of the technology, would be substantial. How substantial? I asked the question like I was asking for a diagnosis, bracing for impact. Wheeler looked at his calculations, looked at me, then said the number that made my brain short-circuit. Given the project value, the stolen technology's worth, and punitive damages for willful infringement, we were looking at a potential settlement of $500 million. $500 million. I sat in that crappy office chair, in that crappy law office, holding the ghost of a dead man's dreams, and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Not hope, not exactly, but purpose, direction, a reason to get up that had nothing to do with routine or obligation. Arthur had been right about one thing. His work mattered. It mattered more than anyone had imagined, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. Not for the money, though that was a nice bonus, but for the promise, for the principle, for the pure, perfect poetry of Mark's empire being built on foundations he'd stolen from a man he'd dismissed. Wheeler asked if I wanted to proceed. I thought about Arthur's grip on my wrist, about promises made to dying men, about Sarah saying I never fought for anything, about Mark calling it just business. Yeah, I told Wheeler, let's proceed. Let's show them what Arthur Johnson's junk was really worth. The call ended with Wheeler promising to file the paperwork immediately. He said the evidence was overwhelming. Said Innovate Dynamics would probably try to settle quickly to avoid the publicity. Said my life was about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. I drove home in a daze. The same route I'd taken 1,000 times suddenly looked different, like someone had adjusted the color settings on reality. Everything was sharper, clearer, more real than it had been in months. The lawsuit moved faster than anything in my life ever had. Within a week, Innovate Dynamics was served. Within 2 weeks, construction on the Elysium Tower ground to a halt. Turns out, when your entire building's revolutionary selling point is based on stolen technology, investors get nervous. Banks start making phone calls. Contractors stop showing up. Wheeler had been right about the settlement talks. Mark's lawyers reached out within a month. But something had changed in me. The old Tom would have taken the first offer, would have been grateful for whatever scraps they threw. But I wasn't that Tom anymore. I was the Tom who kept promises to dead men. The Tom who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Then came the knock on my door. A Tuesday evening, 3 months after filing the lawsuit. I opened it to find my past standing on my doorstep. Mark and Sarah, looking like they'd aged 5 years and 5 months. Mark's perfect teeth weren't quite as bright. Sarah's designer clothes hung wrong, like she'd lost weight. She didn't have to lose. Mark started talking immediately. Fast, desperate words about misunderstandings in family and working things out. How this was all a big mistake. How Arthur must have sold him the designs and forgotten. How we could make this all go away if I'd just be reasonable. Sarah stood behind him, silent, but her eyes were talking, pleading, calculating, trying to figure out if there was an angle she could work. If the Tom she'd left in this house was still the Tom who could be convinced, manipulated, guilt into compliance. They were both wrong. I wasn't angry anymore. Wasn't hurt. Wasn't anything except clear. Crystal clear about who they were and who I'd become. I let Mark finish his speech about family loyalty and not understanding the full situation. Let him paint himself as the victim of circumstances. Let him dig his hole deeper with every word. When he finally stopped talking, the silence was beautiful. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking, a siren in the distance. The sound of my new life having absolutely no room for my old one. I told them there was nothing to discuss. Mark had said himself once, this was just business. And Sarah had been right too. I hadn't been a fighter. But I was fighting now. Not for money, not for revenge, but for a promise I'd made to a dying man who deserved better than dismissal and theft. Sarah finally spoke, said I was being vindictive, that I was destroying Mark's life over money, that this wasn't who I was. She was right about one thing. This wasn't who I was. The old Tom was gone, buried somewhere between an empty coffee can and a trunk full of genius. The new Tom had promises to keep. I closed the door on them. Gently. No slam. No drama. Just the quiet click of finality. Through the window, I watched them stand on my porch for another minute, like they couldn't quite process what had happened. Then they left, and I knew I'd never see them again. The settlement came through 6 months later. Wheeler had been conservative in his estimate. After everything was calculated, the theft, the fraud, the damages, Innovate Dynamics agreed to $470 million. Mark's empire collapsed overnight. The Elysium Tower became a half-built monument to hubris, eventually sold to another developer for pennies on the dollar. I could have felt vindicated, could have celebrated. Instead, I felt empty. Not the bad empty of before, but the clean empty of a whiteboard wiped clear, ready for something new to be written. The money went into trusts and foundations immediately. I kept enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. The rest went to the Arthur Johnson Foundation. It had a nice ring to it. Better than Innovate Dynamics, anyway. The foundation's mission was simple. Help people achieve dreams that money shouldn't prevent. medical bills that destroyed savings, educational opportunities that seemed impossible, and yes, adoption costs for couples who would love to give, but not the $30,000 agencies demanded. I ran it myself at first, working from the same kitchen table where I'd signed my life away to Mark's lies. The Folgers can sat next to my laptop, still empty but somehow less sad, more like a reminder than a memorial. The first family we helped was the Johnsons. No relation to Arthur, just cosmic coincidence. They'd been trying to adopt for 7 years. Had the love, the home, the everything except the money. We covered everything. Legal fees, agency costs, travel expenses. Watching them hold their daughter for the first time was worth more than any amount Mark had stolen. But it wasn't until Lena walked into my office that things really changed. Not an office, really. Just a converted bedroom in my house where I'd review applications. She had a 5-year-old son, Leo, and wanted to adopt his best friend from foster care. A little girl whose parents had died in a car accident. The system was going to separate them, send the girl to another state. Lena's application was different. She wasn't asking for help for herself. She was asking for help for her son, who'd written a letter in crayon explaining why his friend needed to be his sister. The letter was mostly incomprehensible, the logic of a 5-year-old. But the love was clear. The need was clear. I met them in person. Professional distance and all that. But Leo reminded me of something. Not someone. Something. That pure belief that the world could be fixed if adults would just stop making it complicated. His mom had that same quality, hidden under layers of exhaustion and worry. Her story came out over coffee that turned into lunch that turned into dinner. Her husband had left when Leo was 2. Not dramatically, just decided fatherhood wasn't for him, and moved to Seattle to find himself. She'd been holding it together since then, working 2 jobs, making sure Leo had everything he needed if not everything he wanted. The adoption went through in 3 months. The foundation covered everything, but I found myself involved beyond just signing checks, helping with paperwork, driving to appointments when Lena's car broke down, teaching Leo to tie his shoes while we waited for court hearings. Somewhere between the first meeting and the final adoption papers, professional became personal. Lena had this laugh that started silent and built to a snort she'd try to cover with her hand. Leo called me Mr. Tom and asked why I didn't have any kids since I was pretty good at kid stuff. I told him it was complicated. He said most stuff wasn't as complicated as adults made it. Kid was smarter than any developer I'd ever met. The adoption was finalized on a Thursday. Leo's friend became his sister, officially. The courtroom was full of people crying happy tears. I stood in the back, trying to maintain professional distance. Then Leo ran over and hugged my legs, and professional distance became professional nonsense. Lena asked me to dinner to celebrate. A real dinner, she clarified. Not a meeting about foundation business. Not a discussion about adoption procedures. Just dinner, with her and the kids, like normal people do. I said yes. Drove home to change and saw the Folgers on my counter. For the first time in 2 years, I picked it up, really looked at it. Adoption Fund Project Baby in faded glitter pen. Sarah's handwriting from a different life. I thought about throwing it away, moving on completely. But that felt wrong too, like erasing history instead of learning from it. Instead, I put it in a cupboard, not displayed but not discarded. Sometimes the best thing to do with your past is to put it where you can find it if you need to, but where it can't stare at you every day. Dinner was chaos. Leo spilled juice on my shirt within 5 minutes. His new sister, Maya, asked approximately 400 questions about everything from my job to why my eyebrows were fuzzy. Lena apologized every 30 seconds until I told her to stop because this was the best dinner I'd had in years. It was not the food, which was spaghetti with sauce from a jar, because some things are universal. But the noise, the life, the feeling that this wasn't perfect, but it was real. Mark and Sarah had wanted perfect, had demanded perfect, had left when perfect became impossible. This was better than perfect. This was possible. 6 months later, I was at the park with Leo and Maya while Lena grabbed coffee. Not a date, Not exactly. Just something that kept happening. Me being around, them including me, like gravity, but the kind that pulls you towards something good instead of just down. Leo was explaining to Maya why dinosaurs were objectively better than unicorns, using a 5-year-old's version of the scientific method. Maya countered with her own theory about unicorn supremacy. I was judge and jury, trying to keep the peace while secretly agreeing with both of them. Lena came back with coffee and this look on her face. Not the exhausted one I'd first met. Something softer. Hopeful, maybe. She sat next to me on the bench, close enough that our shoulders touched. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I thought about the path that led here. Sarah leaving. Mark's betrayal. Arthur's death. The lawsuit. All of it a chain of disasters that somehow led to this moment. This bench. These kids arguing about mythical creatures. This woman who'd shown me that starting over didn't mean starting empty. In my head, I heard Arthur's voice. That sarcastic grumble he perfected over 80 years. Heard him saying something about how I'd finally figured out what those HVAC systems he designed were really about. Not the cooling or heating, but circulation. Taking the stale air out and bringing fresh air in. Making spaces livable. That's what the foundation did. What Lena and the kids did. What Arthur had done without meaning to. Circulated the stale air out of my life and brought in something fresh. Something that could sustain life instead of just maintaining it. Leo interrupted my philosophy by announcing he needed to pee. Urgently. The way only 5-year-olds can need something. Lena laughed that silent building to snort laugh. Maya decided this was the perfect time to find a butterfly to chase. Chaos resumed. I stood up to take Leo to the bathroom, and Lena caught my hand. Squeeze it. Quick, but intentional. A question and an answer and a promise all at once. Looking back at her, I realized something. The Folgers hadn't been about the money. Had never been about the money. It had been about the dream of building something. Creating something. Being part of something bigger than yourself. That dream hadn't died when Sarah left or when Mark stole everything. It had just been sleeping. Waiting. Composting into something richer and more real than anything we'd planned. The dream was different now. Not perfect. Not pristine. But alive in a way that perfect never could be. Leo tugged on my hand. His bathroom need reaching critical levels. Maya had cornered a butterfly and was trying to negotiate with it. Lena was laughing at the beautiful chaos of it all. And me? I was thinking about Arthur Johnson, about promises kept and dreams deferred, and the strange ways life circles back on itself. About how he'd probably hate the sentimental moment and complain that the park's drainage system was poorly designed. But he'd also probably approve, in his way, would say something about how at least I'd finally made myself useful. I smiled at that thought. At Lena. At the kids. At this life I'd never planned but somehow stumbled into. The settlement money had been life-changing, but not in the way anyone would expect. It hadn't made me rich in the traditional sense. It had made me rich in the only sense that actually mattered. As we walked toward the bathroom, Leo chattering about dinosaurs, Maya following with a butterfly that had wisely escaped, Lena beside me with that comfortable silence of people who don't need to fill every moment with words. I thought about the empty Folgers can in my cupboard. Maybe someday I'd take it out, fill it with something new, spare chain for a different dream. Or maybe I'd leave it empty. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the spaces left behind when our plans fall apart. The gaps where something unexpected can grow. Either way, I was done looking backward. Done comparing. Done measuring my life against anyone else's blueprint. Arthur's genius had built Mark's tower and torn it down. But more importantly, it had built this moment, this possibility, this proof that promises kept to dying men sometimes save living ones. The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in colors that no engineer could replicate. Leo had successfully negotiated his bathroom situation. Maya had named the escaped butterfly Ferdinand. Lena had made a joke about how this was way better than her original plan of dying alone, surrounded by cats. I laughed, really laughed. For the first time in so long, I forgot what it felt like. The sound surprised me, surprised all of us. Then we were all laughing, standing in a park bathroom doorway, for people who'd found each other in the wreckage of other plans. Arthur would have hated the sentimentality of it all, would have complained about something: the bench design, the inefficient layout of the playground, the waste of water in the fountain. But under all that complaint, I think he would have understood, would have recognized what this was: not an ending, not a beginning, but a continuation, a circulation of air and life and possibility, a system working the way it was designed to work. Even if nobody had quite planned it this way, the foundation had helped dozens of families by then, would help hundreds more, each one a small victory against the idea that money should determine who gets to dream. But this family, the one I'd accidentally found myself part of, this was the real victory. Not because it was perfect. God knows it wasn't. Leo had nightmares. Maya struggled with attachment. Lena carried guilt about not being enough. And me? I still sometimes woke up at 3 a.m, wondering if I deserved any of this. But that was the point. We were all broken in our own ways, all carrying our own empty coffee cans full of dreams that didn't quite work out. But together we made something that actually worked. Not in spite of our damage, but because of it. Like the Japanese art of fixing broken pottery with gold, making a repaired piece more beautiful than the original. Mark was gone, last I heard trying to rebuild in Phoenix. Sarah had married some tech executive in San Francisco. The Elysium Tower had been completed by another developer, Arthur's technology properly licensed and credited this time. The building stood as a monument to something, though I wasn't sure what anymore. Justice, maybe, or just the way things sometimes work out. But standing there in that park, watching the sun paint everything gold, feeling Leo's sticky hand in mine, and seeing Lena smile, and hearing Maya sing to Ferdinand the Absent Butterfly, I knew what really mattered. The money from the settlement hadn't made me rich. It had just given me the freedom to discover what rich really meant. It meant this messy, imperfect, beautiful attempt at building something real from the ashes of what was supposed to be. Arthur's voice echoed in my head one more time. Gruff, sarcastic, but maybe, just maybe, a little bit proud. Well, kid, I could hear him saying, looks like you finally figured out what all those blueprints were really for. Not the buildings. Never the buildings, but the people who live in them. And he was right. The crusty old genius was right. It was never about the tower reaching toward heaven. It was about the foundation, about what you build it on, about who you build it with, about keeping promises to dead men and finding life in the keeping. The Folgers can in my cupboard would stay empty, a monument to old dreams that had to die so new ones could live. But somewhere in the noise and chaos and beautiful imperfection of this new life, a different kind of fun was growing, not measured in coins or bills, but in moments, in laughter, in the slow, patient work of building something that no storm could knock down because it wasn't rigid. It bent, it flexed, it survived. And that was worth more than $500 million. That was worth everything.